Azar, thanks indeed for coming in. It's been a gripe now for many years that the savings culture in South Africa is poor. Why has this become particularly concerning now?
It's become ever more concerning because government itself has not been doing its job in terms of saving, and consumers are not saving. So the only source of savings is really corporate profits. And these are now coming under a lot of pressure because of the weak state of the economy. So the overall savings rate has fallen to its lowest level this century. And if you don't have enough savings, you struggle to have money for investment. You're having far too much consumption relative to investment. It's not that consumption is growing rapidly. It isn't, but it's still growing, whereas capital investment is actually declining. And if you don't invest enough, then you're not going to be able to produce the goods and services that the country needs in the longer term. And that points to a sustained period of slow economic growth.
And I guess it makes sense both on a public level, government level, and on a consumer level. But to make matters worse, Azar, I see in that Reserve Bank data, it's interesting to see that public sector wage growth is also decreasing, which means we're getting poorer, aren't we?
What was particularly worrisome was to see that public sector wage growth was shooting up very, very sharply, whereas private sector wage growth was negative, actually. And at the same time, you have public sector capital investment falling very sharply, making a mockery of the government's premise that it's the private sector that's not doing its bit in investing in the economy. Private sector investment is still holding level. It's not growing, but it's not collapsing. Public sector investment fell by some 17% on a quarter-on-quarter basis.
All of this as we approach the medium-term budget. Now, I mean, that's really a gauge of where we are with our economic variables to see what this economy is doing. Also happening this weekend, I see the spotlights falling on the finance minister's plan to rescue the economy. But now it's in the spotlight with the ANC. How important is this that we get all thumbs up for this plan, if indeed that should happen?
I think it's absolutely critical that we get the thumbs up for this plan. The plan is very consistent and coherent. The problem is, will it ever get implemented?
Yeah.
And this problem that I'm highlighting of government spending more on public service and less on capital investment runs totally counter to the government's premise of we need more infrastructural investment. If it doesn't take the lead, then the private sector is also not going to follow. And the problem that we're having right now is that there's a lot of opposition from within the ruling party against the plan that has been put forward by National Treasury. So yes, it's very important that the ANC agrees to the plan, but that still won't guarantee whether it gets implemented or not.
Indeed. So we've been talking about one of the biggest problems this country faces is the fact that we've got poor business sentiment, poor business confidence. When that happens, investment obviously would go down south. I want to get your take on our bond issuance this week. I mean, we've been praising this, certainly Treasury has been praising this, raising $5 billion in that issuance. Do you think it's a sign that foreigners, it's not all lost, that people are still willing to take a chance on this country?
I do believe that foreigners still actually have a more positive sense of South Africa right now than we internally in the country.
Yep.
We're probably too close to seeing what is happening. There are still some institutional strengths in this country, and foreigners see the relative soundness of our monetary policy and a national treasury that is trying to do its bit. It also, I think, reflects a situation where international investors are fed up with the low returns that they're getting on their investments in bonds in America and especially in Europe and Japan. They're looking for some return, a positive return. They're seeing equity prices around the world too expensive, so they're looking for some return. And our local bond yields are offering over 9%, so go for it.
All right. Azar, before I let you go, I've got 10 seconds. Interest rate decision coming up in 2 months' time. Do you think we'll get a cut?
I think that there's a good chance we will get a cut. Yesterday's PPI figures again pointed to the fact that inflationary pressures are relatively subdued. Overall, wage inflation is actually quite low. So I do think the atmosphere is ripe for an interest rate cut, especially given that countries outside of South Africa are also cutting interest rates.
Thanks very much indeed for coming in. That was Dr. Azad Jameen, Chief Economist at Econometrics.